Hi, collective. It's Shana. Y'all, it's been a long time since I've gone live, okay? And I'm still not great at it, okay? And I'm nervous about live, okay? But I've been trying to load a video on a chapter reading that I've done. This is going to be the third or the fourth time, collective, okay? And I'm tired, okay? ah, okay? And then each video I had to delete them, right? Because it's just nothing there. And then it's like now there's this loud humming noise coming from next door. Okay. So they definitely don't want this information out. Okay. So first, let me say, no, first, let's clear the image. Okay. Let me turn the book over, add some surprise to the situation. Archangel Michael, I ask that you preside over this reading. I ask that you protect me and my collective as we channel, transmute, and harmonize the energy for the highest good. Ashe, Ashe Collective. Okay, and it's literally a reading collective. Okay, collective, I'm going to try to read the whole chapter. Okay, it just takes time. It's about 14 pages, but it's wordy, I think, or something. But it's important. Okay, first, I want to say thank you to President Donald Trump for having, as well as the Secretary of Health, I think, right? Kennedy, right? And the other staff, okay, who had the courage today to speak the truth about the tie between Tylenol and autism, okay? As well as I would like to thank him for expressing his views on vaccinations of newborn babies, okay? All right, collective, saying all that, I think it's important that I get started because when I was listening to him, it prompted me to go back and find some old books that I have. Okay, let me get the other one real quick, collective. Give me a second. Oh man, what did I do with it? All right. I need to look this book up and see the price, okay? But there are two books and they're about vaccinations, okay? I purchased these books in my 20s, okay? This one I probably only paid like $10 for. This one at the most maybe 20, 25, okay? This book is called A Shot in the Dark. Why the P in the DPT vaccination may be hazardous to your health, your child's health. Collective, forgive me, my throat and my mouth is dry, okay? I keep drinking water. I need the lemon water, okay? But look, it's by Harris L. Coulter and Barbara Lowe Fisher. Okay? And this book is the one I want to read from, okay? I looked online. I see where this book is now almost $500 collective, okay? And I had some other good gems that I had to get rid of because they were just destroyed. Okay, it's really old. All right, but this one's called Oofing by Injection, the story of the medical conspiracy against America by Eustace Mullins. Okay. I want to read the table of contents and then we're going to go to the chapter. I'm going to try to just not make too many comments because this is going to be long, collective, okay? So you can take breaks if you go back and listen to it, okay? All right, but the content says Chapter 1, The Medical Monopoly. Chapter 2, Quacks on Quackery. Chapter 3, The Profits of Cancer. Chapter 4, Death and Vaccination. Chapter 5, The Fluoridation Conspiracy. Chapter 6, Wither AIDS. Chapter 7, The Action of Fertilizers. Chapter 8, Contamination of the Food Supply. Chapter 9, The Drug Test. Chapter 10, The Rockefeller Syndicate. And then the last part is the addenda. Okay. All right, we're going to read chapter 6. Okay. That number 6 is important. And it's on page 169. Okay. That makes me think about the year 1969 when it was purported. Okay. I'm not sure whose book I read it in. Okay. It might have been Milton Cooper or something. But if not, I don't want to put anything on anybody they didn't do, right? I can't remember. But they talked about AIDS and HIV being a man-made disease, okay? All right, but this is chapter 6, okay? And let's say real quick about the 6. We see the 6s here. We talk about 666, right? The mark of the beast and carbon, right? We also have 6 feet under when you're buried, right? We also had during the 19, right? We had, stand 6 feet apart, okay? As well as I learned the other day that when DNA inside of a nucleus is unraveled, they say if you were to unravel it, it would stretch 6 feet, collective. Okay, so there's something significant about the number 6. This whole reading is about us possibly making ties to this current AIDS epidemic, okay? All right, collective. Maybe somebody will come in. Maybe that'll help me. But this is like doing my own video with no one here, okay? All right, I'm going to take my eyeglasses off, collective, and let me get some more water. This is going to be a long read, okay? Hopefully it'll be shorter this time, though. Chapter 6, With or AIDS, page 169. The most talked about medical phenomena of the 1980s is AIDS, the acquired immune deficiency syndrome. The name is of some interest. First of all, it is said to be acquired, presuming some action on the part of the victim in coming down with this disease. Second, it results in or it's characterized by an immune deficiency, meaning that the human system loses the ability to fight against the old. Second, I'm going to read that part again. Second, it results in or it's characterized by immune deficiency, meaning that the human system loses the ability to fight against and overcome these inimical presences. The result is that the system becomes prey to a variety of infections, some of which I'm going to say could be fatal, okay? The prevalence of these infections occurs through 2 dominant illnesses, Kaposi sarcoma, evidenced by large sores on the skin, and a form of pneumonia, okay, with the lungs. It is noteworthy that pneumonia, which had been a fatal disease, had largely been conquered. It had been called the old man's friend because it took off many elderly persons who presumably no longer had a desire to live, okay? And with this part up here, just keep in mind with pneumonia, that's the lungs, right? And I've mentioned before, I'm not a doctor, collective, okay? But with the lungs, you definitely want to cleanse the colon, okay? Cleanse the colon as much as possible. I mean, you want to have good bacteria will eventually, I feel, right, re-inhabit, okay? Because there's so much bad bacteria in there. It needs a good flushing, okay? I'm not a doctor, okay? One thing you will notice, once you first start getting maybe a good bowel movement, you're going to notice that the phlegm and the congestion, you're going to sneeze more, you're going to cough more, and there's going to be more productive phlegm, okay? And it may be alarming a little bit, right? But you always go to your doctor, right? But that's a part of the cleansing process happening, okay? All right, so just expect that at some level, okay? But it's helping to break up mucus and turn it into a more liquidy format so it can be expelled, okay? All right, it says, the class of infections which have become widespread through what is called AIDS were first recognized by physicians, veterinarians, and biologists about 50 years ago. Okay. At that time, many sheep in Ireland, okay, here we go, Ireland, were afflicted by a killer epidemic called Madi Visma. Biologists determined that Madi Visma caused a new class of viruses. Because of the time they required to become virulent, these viruses were called slow viruses. I'm getting slow burn, slow dagger, okay? The advent of these slow viruses presages a new era in the medical history of mankind. Human beings prior to this time have been affected by slow viruses, although they have been found among animals. Wait a minute, let me say that again. Human beings prior to this time have not been affected by slow viruses, although they have been found among animals being transmissible among monkeys and apes. Slow viruses are also a type known as retroviruses. That's a familiar term, collective, right? Those viruses that lay dormant in the system. You may have an attack at a certain point, and then it goes away. You're like, okay, you're fine, but it's still there, hiding, okay, waiting to be triggered or activated, okay? Okay, so slow viruses are also a type of known as retroviruses. When they enter an infected cell, they assimilate into the genetic structure, so they're becoming one with the structure. It's almost like a destiny swap, okay? Apparently during the cell process of mitosis or cell division, okay? Such division being a normal process of healthy growth. They're talking about cell division or mitosis is a normal process, okay? So this virus enters in, imitates, or takes over pretty much, okay? Maybe it starts to imitate, observe. I don't know if it jumps right in and attacks or if it lingers hidden, right? And then it attacks after observing, okay? How can it get in, right? And I'm getting like it enters the DNA. It has to, right? That nucleus. And that's where it starts to perform the destiny swap, okay? So that the cell becomes it and it's no longer what it originally was. That's what I'm getting, okay? All right. Now it says mitosis is one of the two alternatives which face every cell in the human body. So mitosis is one of the two. Okay, so there's two ways a cell can go, they're saying, okay? Such division, okay, wait a minute. Okay, either it divides and grows, okay, through mitosis or as a life process, or it submits to viral replication and resultant cell death as part of a disease process. Let me read that part again, collective. There's something here. All right, mitosis is one of the two alternatives which face every cell in the human body. Either it divides, okay, it breaks up and it grows, right? It reduplicates, excuse me, through mitosis, so it's going to grow, right? Or, excuse me, collective, where in the hell is it? I need a little thing here. Mitosis is one of the two alternatives which face every cell in the human body. Either it divides and grows through mitosis as a life process, or it submits to viral replication and result in cell death as part of a disease process. Okay, so it makes me feel like this viral replication, it goes haywire. Maybe this replication first starts with inside of the cell, right? And it just keeps replicating the same thing over and over again to possibly the cell explodes. That's what I'm picturing, okay? Thus, we find at the crux of the AIDS problem the ultimate question of the life or death of the entire organism. This is why AIDS, once it reaches the virulent stage, is said to be incurable, resulting in the death of the host body. In a healthy body, some 10 million cells are dying every second, okay? At this same time, they are usually replaced by the body process. So that's a huge transaction going on, okay? 10 million cells dying while 10 million cells are being replaced in a second collective, okay? It makes me think about that woman, the young the sister, I think she was young, probably in her 30s or 40s. She, in California, where the family hadn't found her in a year, but they found she was dead in a hospital collective, okay? My condolences to the family. I think it happened in the month of November of 2024. I think her last name was Williams, okay? And but they found her. I think her organs weren't there collective, okay? And I think her skin wasn't there, okay? And skin is like one of the largest places to find skin cells collective. I'm getting a connection to biotech as well, okay? They already said it here. All right. Let's go, if I can find it. Okay. In a healthy body. So it says such immediate replacement cannot be orchestrated by the usual body processes of genetic information theories. Okay, and I'm going to say such as chromosomes, enzymes, or nerve impulse signals. So it can't be duplicated that way. These 10 million cells, okay, that quick transaction. There's another system or another process that is doing this, okay? And y'all forgive me, I've read this so many times, so my voice is wavering, okay? The instantaneous nature of the process requires that it be commanded by bioradiation. So this instant transaction in a second, right, of tens of millions of cells dying and being replaced with new ones, right, cannot happen according to the natural process. So it says the instantaneous nature of the process requires that it be commanded by bioradiation phenomena. Okay, I don't know what that is, but bio has to do with science, the body, and cells. Radiation has to be light, okay? Some form of light. These are triggered by coherent ultra weak photon emissions from living tissues of varying wavelengths. Let's see if we can break that down. These are triggered, meaning like it's activated, right? This whole instantaneous process, right, of cells dying and replacing a multitude of them, right? It's triggered by a coherent, okay? Coherent indicating like a bond, right? There's a connection. They're not a connection like it won't fall away, right? But a coherent, ultra weak photon emission. So these are like small, I'm getting like small bursts of light, but there is a coherence to it. There's a shape, a form, or something. There's a connection, okay? All right. Then it says these are triggered by, okay, I said that. Let me read that part again though. These are triggered by coherent, ultra weak photon emissions from living tissues of varying wavelengths. So the tissues, the skin and the cells, right? It doesn't just have to be skin though, right? But the tissues are also different types, right? As well as different lengths I'm getting, okay, with the wavelengths. So this is like the conditions, the requirements in order to produce this reaction, this instantaneous process, right? These photon emissions, according to their wavelengths, control biological functions which are in constant activity, such as photorepair, photoaxism, photoperiodic clocks, mitosis, and multi-photon events. Ultra-weak photon emissions from living cells exhibit a spectral a spectral distribution from infrared, 900 nanometers, to ultraviolet, 200 nanometers. This photon intensity correlates with the conformational states of DNA. So this spectrum from infrared to ultraviolet, it says correlate. So I'm getting like it works well, right? With the conformational states. I'm thinking like the preparational states in order to prepare to begin this process, right? Conformational states of DNA. So they're talking about the making of DNA collective. It's got to be. During which activity the spectral intensities of biophotons, body related light, amount to magnitudes of some 10 over 40 magnitude times higher than those of thermal equilibrium at physiological temperatures. During which, let me read that again. During which activity the spectral intensities, okay, so the light is increasing, it's intensifying, of biophotons, these body lights like sprites, I don't know, collective, okay, amount to magnitude, so the amount and the activity and the frequency of these bio lights, photons, are increasing. So it's like an electrical storm I'm getting, okay? Okay, so 10 over 40 magnitude times higher than those of thermal equilibrium. What is thermal equilibrium? That's like so-called 98.6, even though we know we ain't all there. That's what I'm getting, okay? We all have variations, but there's a range, right? At physiological temperatures. And physiology, what it has to do like with movements and things of the body, the way things function, disease process, things like that, okay? So let's go on. It says the biomolecule with the highest information density, DNA, seems to be the source of biophoton regulatory radiation. Let's read that again. The biomolecule, oh my goodness, collective. The biomolecule, let me see if let's look up molecule. Molecule. It says the smallest particle of a substance that retains the chemical and physical properties of the substance and is composed of two or more atoms, a group of like or different atoms held together by chemical forces. But look, this is the key part for me. The smallest particle of a substance that retains the chemical and physical properties of the substance, okay? So it's talking about us, right? So in terms of the body, that small molecule, it sounds like they're saying contains everything that is us in that one molecule. Even though they build and form cells and organs and tissues and all that, right? And systems, right? It's almost like the God particle is what I'm getting, okay? Now, collective, let me see if I can find this again because I just run my mouth too much. All right. Let me read that part again and we're going to keep going. There's a lot of hard words in here that we're not going to be able to look up. All right. But the biomedical with the highest information density, DNA, they're saying it is DNA. It has the highest information density. It can store the most information as far as they know, okay? Seems to be the source of biophoton, these lights within possibly the cells, a chemical reaction, okay? Seems to be the source of biophoton regulatory radiation. So regulatory is like keeping something like balance, right? So there's the cell or the DNA is telling the cell when to set off, so to speak, right? Flick the lights, I don't know. Functioning as an exciplex laser, okay? Something like a laser, like laser shooting off, okay? And comparing favorably with the fields of man-made lasers, okay? So let's go. Thus, the problems of AIDS brings us to the most basic properties of cell function. The ability of the living cell to respond to microwaves without discernible variation in temperature apparently indicates a non-thermal mechanism like an activated crystal. All right, so it's like they're saying that this heating or whatever is occurring not by like fire heat where you feel it real hot. Like with the microwave, you can heat something up and the microwave don't feel hot. I don't think. I don't use a microwave collector really like that. So, but I don't think the microwave will heat up. But the item, the food inside does. And the reaction in that sense is the food becoming warm and able for you to cook it, right? I mean, eat it, right? So this is something similar that's occurring within the cells, okay? And they're also relating it to a crystal, okay? Because the crystals can form, I need to do a little research on that, right? But crystals form under many different conditions, okay? Because they're all over the place, right? But I feel like it's speaking to like almost like an internal fire, but not. It's not hot, okay? And when we think about crystals, it's relating to light, like the angles of light, the angels of light, right? Because when I look at crystals, especially when they have that cut, here's that other crystal. You see how the different cuts, right? And if one light goes into that prism, I'm relating it to a prism, right? It's going to come out in different ways. And let's say if we put a light through this crystal somewhere, if it was possible, it would reflect in all these different little cuts and angles in a different way, okay? But at the same time, it's still the same object, okay? So I think that's relevant. All right. Thus, aids may help us in understanding the tuning mechanism, okay, of cells. Tuning forks are very important. Tuning forks could possibly activate cells to do something positive if that's what you're using it for, okay? And if you're learning how to use it, right? But I feel like I'm not a doctor, but I feel like these are ways to use things without too much hurt. But I think it's important to research, okay? So, but frequency is another way as it relates as well to wavelengths, okay? All right, so let's see again. It says, thus, aids may help us in understanding the tuning mechanism of cells, which indicate its state of health or disease, and thus improve our understanding of all diseases affecting the organism, okay? So frequency can alter the effect of the cells, okay? A wide-ranging study of living cells from primitive bacteria to those of man shows that these cells produce natural alternating currents or ACs fields, which in frequency ranges lower than 100 MHz show maximal electrical oscillation, like movement, right? At or near mitosis. Mitosis is cell division. So shows these cells produce natural alternating currents. AC is the electricity we use in the socket, right? So there's some sort of electromagnetic thing occurring, and it's creating a force field. And once it hits certain ranges, okay, it says frequency in the ranges lower than 100 MHz show maximal electrical oscillation. So once these frequencies hit this cell or in this region, they start to see the cell reproduce, collective, okay? And I'm sure this is probably pretty basic for them in the lab, okay? All right, so, but all of this is important because we're going to be the ones to find the cure to this. They already have it, but they're not going to release it, I don't think. Maybe they will. Maybe under the Trump administration, they will. Who knows? Okay, but let's see. Here again, tune systems are triggering biological actions in a manner which is not yet fully understood. So your cure or anyone's cure, collective, could possibly be right there. Very simple and practical within your home, okay? All right. Thus, Thus the death, okay, in one video, the name Hudson came out, and I thought about Hudson River, but I forgot about Rock Hudson. And in some of those videos, stuff about, okay, let me just keep reading. Thus, the death of Rock Hudson, one of Hollywood's most promiscuous homosexual psychopaths, may lead to the fortunate result of inspiring new breakthroughs in our understanding of the most basic cell functions. Unfortunately, the cancer profiteers and medical monopoly insist on treating AIDS as a malfunction of the cell itself, which of course calls for the magic bullet, quote unquote, the chemotherapy, okay, which will be provided at a price by the drug trust. Okay, what a name. In fact, chemotherapy attacks the immune system. We know that, right? Thus increasing the fatality of the disease. The establishment approach is to attack the virus, not to aid the system in overcoming it. Okay, what sense does that make? Okay, thus not only bypassing the immune system, which is already under attack from this disease, but actually aiding in its conquest. Okay, so they're saying, like, hey, the cells are already compromised, the immune system's compromised. Now you're going to bring in a drug that's extremely strong, like chemotherapy, and you're going to kill the bad cells, so to speak. You may only have the bad cells left. Okay, some people, not you collective, whoever, forgive me, okay? So why would you do that? Unless it is your intentions to cause the demise. This is for entertainment purposes only, in my belief, okay? To cause the demise of those individuals, okay? Let's keep going. Okay, but actually aiding in its conquest. There have been repeated claims that AIDS is actually a man-made virus, okay? And that goes back to that year, 1969, okay? This started on page 169, okay? It seems to have been unknown prior to 1976, when mild traces of it were discovered in African blood banks. Available evidence indicates that it then began spreading throughout Africa and subsequently to the United States during the mid 70s. Okay, I was born in those years, I guess. Okay. A possible reference to this or some other created virus appears in the WHO Bulletin, verse 47 collective. 47, as much as I see 47 and 70, but 47. Okay, page 251 or 251 in 1972. Okay, an attempt should be made to see if viruses can in fact exert selective effects on immune function. The possibility should be looked into that the immune response to the virus itself may be impaired if the infecting virus damages more or less selectively the cell responding to the virus. Okay, so they're talking about the virus attacking the cell that's coming to attack the virus, if that makes sense. That don't make sense. They're talking about the immune cells coming to fight, right? Like the T cells and the macrophages and a whole bunch of basophils, different things, right? They come to try to get these things out of the body. But this cell that's destiny swapped, okay, is now an enemy, right? So maybe the immune system doesn't recognize it. I don't know what's happening, okay? Because it looks like the normal cell, but they know something's going on in havoc in the body. That's what I picture. But I'm probably not right with all that, okay? But let's keep going. An attempt should be made to see if viruses can in fact exert selective effects on immune function, okay? Y'all, so much for me to say in this stuff, okay? The possibility should be looked into that the immune response to the virus itself should be impaired if the infecting virus damages more or less selectively the cell responding to the virus. Okay, I just read that. But that also made me think about the video about the biotech industry and the Golgi body apparatus, okay? The Golgi bodies are responsible for transporting things in a cell. DNA, different stuff, okay? It could be waste or whatever, dirty stuff as well. And they move throughout the cell in like little pockets. I think they call them like vesicles or something, right? With a little bit of goo in there, cytoplasmic goo, and whatever that material is that needs to be moved to wherever. So I feel like there's some sort of research which came out in that video on these Golgi body apparatuses in order to figure out how to move DNA or whatever viruses to targeted locations. Okay. All right. Now we're going to Colton Gadjewski, National Institute of Health Director at Fort Detrick, noted, in the facility I have a building where more good and loyal communists, scientists from the USSR and mainland China work with full pass keys to all the laboratories than there are Americans. This was a quote from this person, they say. Okay, so he's saying he's got communists in this lab, okay? He's got scientists from the USSR. I'm sure they had German scientists, like people have purported, right? As well as China, okay, working here with full access to all these laboratories, all this bacteria and everything, and their minds are ripe and warped, okay? Okay, even the Army's infectious disease unit is loaded with foreign workers, not always friendly nationals. This fuels speculation that such a virus could have been created by alien and unfriendly scientists working in the heart of our own defense laboratories, whether as a plan to decimate our population or as one more step towards ultimate world domination collective. Okay, this is treason. Okay, absolutely. If this is true, this is treason. Okay. From 1976 to 1981, and it's worse than that, collective. Okay, but from 1976 to 1981, AIDS was almost exclusively publicly identified as a disease of homosexuals. Thus, the general population felt no alarm at problems confined to a relatively small group. The few non-homosexuals who came down with AIDS acquired it from public blood banks through homosexuals who had sold their blood. AIDS was then termed, quote unquote, gay cancer. Okay, and why would they even relate it to cancer, collective? Okay, by doctors who informed patients they had the disease. It was usually unmistakable because of large purplish blotches which disfigured the skin, proof of the presence of Kaposi sarcoma. At this time, many doctors believed the disease originated in the peculiar physical factors of homosexual activity. This is key, collective, because I've had to read this like 3 times, okay, because the videos, that's why I'm live, okay? All right, so it says, at this time, many doctors believe the disease originated in the peculiar physical factors of homosexual activity, with considerable evidence pointing to the use of fatty lubricants in rectal intercourse. These lubricants introduced into the intestinal area in this unusual manner apparently provided a fertile breeding ground for the onslaught of the infection. Okay? Dr. Lawrence, this is criminal, collective. How many people purchased this? And is that on the container? Okay? Dr. Lawrence Burton, a noted cancer specialist, raised the question, what effect does repeated and sustained introduction of lubricants into the anal cavity have upon the immune system? It was noted that this caused immune depression in test animals. Burton's attorney, W.H. Moore, suggested that hydrogenated fats, either consumed orally or used anally, could cause AIDS. Now, have we ever heard of that, collective? This again brings us back to the role which nutrition plays in any disease, such as the victims of atomic radiation in Japan. Those on traditional low-fat diets suffered substantially fewer fatalities than those in the modern high-fat diet. This also raises again the question of hydrogenated fats and their possible deleterious, okay, taking away the strength and the vitality, right? Effect upon the human system, either heated, which produces dangerous chemical changes, or ingested cold, okay? The initial reaction to many homosexuals on being informed that they had AIDS was, this is key too, okay? AIDS was what has been termed by psychologists, homosexual rage, a dementia in which the patient is possessed by a mad desire for revenge. The phenomena of this type of AIDS dementia, this could be a factor of the actual creation. This could be have been placed within the virus collective, okay? If you understand what I'm saying, okay? So, but it says a dimension in which the patient is possessed by a mad desire for revenge. The phenomena of this type of AIDS dementia has been observed in some 60% of AIDS patients. Keep in mind, this book was written in 1988, okay? Bolstering some doctors' belief that AIDS is merely a new variant on the ancient syphilis infection. Now, there has been several reads with that Tuskegee card coming out. Okay, there is a connection. This could be absolutely valid in some ways. Okay, maybe everybody doesn't have the same type. Like, we're going to keep going. Okay, all right. And if anybody's going to cure it, it's going to be us. All right. Ah, man, where was I? Okay, bolstering some doctors' belief that AIDS is merely a new variant on the ancient syphilis infection. Syphilis often is characterized by paresis, deterioration of the brain until schizophrenia takes in. Other physicians have related, that's a key connection collective. Other physicians have related AIDS dementia to toxoplasmosis, a cat-borne parasite. Oh, wow. Okay. Other physicians have related AIDS dementia to toxoplasmosis, a cat-borne parasite, which causes the same type of dementia which afflicts patients with AIDS. The problem with pursuing any of these leads is not only, forgive me, y'all. The problem with pursuing any of these leads is that not only is the medical monopoly waiting in the wings to reap more billions of dollars in profits from this new epidemic, but the civil libertarians are forestalling investigations of AIDS by defending the privacy of its victims. Like other groups which either have offended society or have purposely cut themselves off from what is termed society, homosexuals have developed a fanatical group loyalty. Okay, this is this author's views and their way of speaking. Okay, it may be triggering, but there's a lot of good information here. Okay, all right. So it says many homosexual activists see in AIDS one more representation of the fundamental differences which create an insurmountable barrier between themselves and other humans. As such, they are exploiting it and perhaps are reluctant to see any solutions to AIDS, okay? And maybe eggs are important, like egg cleansings, okay? But look, and I'm sure that would be greatly helpful, okay? But and that's helpful with many things, okay? But oh my goodness, what was I going to say? They're using the LGBT, like those movements back in the day, right? In order to drive this agenda, okay? To, make it easier for this disease to fester in the country, okay? In communities. I'm getting Jeffrey Epstein collective, okay? Because it was said that he was employed by high officials collective in order to go off on that venture and do all that collective. It was all a plan, is what was said, okay? Okay. Y'all give me 1 second. My goodness. Many homosexual, what is it? Activists, okay. Okay, this group loyalty has manifested itself in a telling way. The determination of many homosexuals with AIDS to infect as many people as possible, not only through greatly extending their already voluminous sexual context. Okay, this is like I said, this person's opinion, right? But also by infecting others through their bartered blood, like giving it to blood banks. Okay. And before I go on, let me say this real quick about the homosexual and what he said about that, right? So I believe that, let's say, regular, just people who are openly gay, and they're just regular people, right? And they have regular relationships. I feel like they go into a relationship and it's like a relationship, right? But here I think he's alluding to, and maybe he doesn't know it, he's alluding to the down low lifestyle collective. Okay, this is the problem I feel. Because the lying to women and wives and everybody, right, about the practice, it fosters the need for secrecy, okay, which means that one has to find more partners. So it's not a consistent with one partner. It could be for some, right? But overall, I'm feeling like there are many different partners because you have to hide the secret. You go and have sex and then you never see them again. Okay, I don't know. I feel like that's a element. Okay, so this is a problem. That's why it's important. Just be who you want to be. Who am I to say who you're supposed to be? Okay. All right. Collective, if I would stop running my mouth. Okay. In Los Angeles, a James Markowski, who was then in the final stages of AIDS, was arrested June 23rd, 1987, for selling his blood to the Los Angeles Plasma Production Associates. He admitted that he wanted to infect as many people as possible before he died. On January 7th, 1987, a notorious homosexual activist, Robert Schwab, who was also dying of AIDS, made a public appeal to all his confreres that gay males, quote unquote, should immediately give blood if they had been diagnosed as having AIDS. Whatever action is required to get national attention is valid, he declared. If that includes blood terrorism, so be it. It was noted that following Schwab's widely advertised public appeal, blood donations increased by a dramatic 300% in New York and San Francisco, okay? The two queenly centers of American homosexuality. None other than Rock Hudson, when he was informed that he had AIDS, this is key, was overcome with homosexual rage, quote unquote. He immediately launched on a frenetic campaign to infect as many people as possible, concentrating, how diabolical is this? Concentrating on teenagers who had no idea of the dangers they were facing. In his insane determination to lead this world in a sexual Gotterdammerung, Hudson must have infected dozens, if not hundreds, of unsuspecting youths. Even today, lawsuits are still pending against his estate as a result of his orgy of fear and hate. While the Hudsons were dying their slow and agonizing death, like slow daggers collective, okay? Most members of the American public viewed them with a mixture of approbation and contempt. There was no fear because, as yet, there was no indication of peril to the population at large. However, as early as September 16th, 1983, okay, that's a key year collective, okay, at a health conference in Washington, D.C., the question was raised by Dr. John Greyerholtz. Will AIDS become another bubonic plague? Okay, it's making me think about that 19 again, okay? When they talk about triggers, when they were talking about triggers early on, okay, to activate the cell to make it mitote, right? Divide, right? And they also talked about, let's keep going. There's a connection I feel between the vaccinations as well as these more recent triggers, okay? Possibly. There's many triggers that can activate these things, okay? These may be retroviruses in the body that possibly were placed there from these mass vaccination campaigns when we were younger, okay? And there's many other ways they can do it, okay, collective? But this is for entertainment purposes only, okay? All right, so it says, where was it? None other than Rockefeller. No, I just read that part, wait a minute. While the Rock Hudson, they're not that part, collective. Okay, there was population, however, early, no. At the health conference, 16. Another blue. Okay, let's go. It says the conference supplied the finding that AIDS can be the harbinger of a series of Holocaustal epidemics, collective. So that's crazy. So a lot of different things in once, different types of viruses. And this is what they're suggesting. This is what I got when they were saying this before. Or maybe they say it in this part, how they relate it to other diseases, okay? But they related it to the syphilis, which I feel that's valid, okay? And like syphilis, they allowed Black men to linger on without treatment when they had collective, okay? All right. Dr. William Hasseltine, did I read this part? Of Harvard Medical School reported that an estimated 10 million Africans were now infected, okay, by 1985 collective, okay? An estimated 10 million Africans were now infected with the AIDS virus. However, government authorities here continued to assure the public that AIDS was limited to 4 groups: homosexuals, Haitians, intravenous drug users, and Blacks. Now, how can you put a target on these 4 groups like that? Unless you know this is what your Golgi bodies possibly set out to do, okay? With your virus packed within it, or their virus, okay? All right, and this was also a way to put blinders on the general population to feel like, oh, okay, we're okay. It's just those people, but everybody's being affected, okay? I apologize. Since most American citizens would never come into direct contact with any of these groups, a fetid sub-underclass, which existed in its own twilight world of filth and degeneracy, collective, okay? It seemed that the AIDS epidemic would never become a threat to the American middle class, okay? And I feel like he's speaking, this person, they may have those feelings about racism, right? But I feel like he's speaking from the mindset of the population, okay? The government agency, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, the heroes of the Great Swine Flu Massacre, I got to do some research on that one, now did their best to keep the American people in the dark as to a possible spread of AIDS. They issued periodic ukases or something that's saying, to the effect that AIDS could not be spread by insects, which makes no sense, okay? AIDS could not be contracted by kissing, although they admitted that their AIDS virus was present in saliva, and other reassurances whose scientific validity seems to have been taken directly from the pages of Grimm's fairy tales, okay? And Grimm's fairy tales, what's that? Rumpelstiltskin, a German fairy tale collective, okay? Implicating German scientists, for me. Even so, CDC estimated that by 1988, that's another significant year. Okay, and let me say real quick, with all these numbers, that number 47, 88, I wrote a card recently for 11/22/1963. That was the year that Kennedy was assassinated, right? In the date. I didn't realize that because I always see 11/22 collective. I mean, it doesn't fail. So some of these numbers we see are not just angel numbers. These are like indications to points in time in history, events. There's something that's being released from like a vault. So these are like access codes to certain points in time, I feel. Okay, they want to expose something, reveal something to us. Okay. All right. So it says, even so, CDC estimated that by 1988, from 1 to 1.5 million Americans would be infected with the AIDS virus. There were already 5,890 members of the U.S. military or the U.S. Army who were infected with AIDS, okay? So they're also testing on Army people. This is my belief. Dr. David Axelrod, Commissioner of Health for the state of New York, solemnly warned that all those who had the AIDS virus were doomed after they created it, right? Now, maybe not him, but virtually all those infected are doomed. These were quotes by this person, okay? Dr. John Seal of Richmond, Virginia, presided at the conference June 11, 1987, in which he stated positively that AIDS is not a sexually transmitted disease. It is a contagious disease, which is also transmitted in the blood. Okay, they said Dr. John Seal of Richmond, Virginia said that, okay? He denounced the Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Everett Koop at that time, okay, for deliberately spreading disinformation about the disease, claiming that joining Koop in this campaign of scientific disinformation were Sir Donald Aitken. Okay, so he's talking about he's outing the people who were along with them in misinforming people, okay? So it says it was Sir Don Aitken, Chief Medical Officer of the United Kingdom, that's his position, Dr. Halfdan Muller, Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Robert Gallo of the National Institute of Health, okay, and Professor Victor Zamnov, Director of the Ivanovsky Institute of Virology in Moscow, okay? This Gallo name, he's going to speak about that more. Dr. Seal was not the first to point the finger at Dr. Gallo, resident scientist of the National Institute of Health, who was famed as having discovered, and who was the guy recently with the 19, okay? I forgot his name, okay? But it was the National Institute, no, he was WHO, okay? Either way. All right, who was famed as having discovered the okay, let me say that part again, collective, and I'm going to stop interrupting too much. Dr. Seal was not the first to point the finger at Dr. Gallo, resident scientist of the National Institute of Health, who was famed as having discovered the immunodeficiency virus, HIV, which he claimed was the cause of AIDS. After Gallo's discovery, the NIH, which doles out funds for research on AIDS, as well as many other categories, consistently denied funds to any scientist whose work failed to bear out Gallo's claim. Okay, so they didn't want anybody to go against what he said. Okay. President Ronald Reagan then appointed a special presidential commission on AIDS, which was intended to solve the problem. It tried to do so by meeting in great secrecy and by meeting without a quorum, so that no notes could be taken of the proceedings. Okay. This is an interesting name for me. Okay. Admiral James D. Watkins was head of these meetings, which came in for much criticism, merely because the American public wanted to know what was being accomplished, okay? I'm getting families involved in hurting family members. That's what I'm getting, collective, okay? Okay, let's keep going. One, because it's just not a coincidence that I pulled this book out today, okay? I had to find it. And that this is the third time I've tried to read this, okay? I've been reading for hours, okay? One of the researchers who was to come into conflict with Dr. Gallo over the HIV controversy is Dr. Peter Duesberg, professor of virology at the University of California at Berkeley. Duesberg is also a member of the National Academy of Sciences. He had been brought to Gallo's own laboratory to work under a fellowship grant after studying HIV in the same laboratory where Gallo had claimed to have made his monumental findings. Dr. Duesberg excuse me, concluded that HIV virus did not meet the standard criterion required of a disease-causing agent. Okay, he published, so that could possibly not even be what is causing this so-called AIDS. Okay, he published his findings in the medical journal Cancer Research in March 1987 and sat back to wait for Dr. Gallo to justify his conclusions. Both he and the editor of Cancer Research, Dr. Peter McGee, were amazed when Dr. Gallo made no reply, either then or in the ensuing months. Dr. Gallo also refused to return telephone calls seeking to elicit some reaction to Duesberg findings, right? Apparently, it was one of those famous fact or fiction researches in which Dr. Gallo had claimed to pinpoint the HIV virus as the sole cause of AIDS. This sort of thing occurs more often than anyone realizes in the academic and scientific world, which is riddled with petty jealousies, calculated deceit, and denial of funds to anyone who might expose their fake research. As we mentioned earlier, most scientists, when asked for their research notes, usually respond that they have been accidentally burned, quote unquote, okay? Whether anyone has ever seen any of Dr. Gallo's work isolating the HIV virus is not known. However, he has since moved to cut off any further studies of the HIV virus. Dr. Harvey Bailey, research editor of the medical journal Biotechnology, had organized a White House workshop on the subject. How does HIV cause AIDS? It was to be co-hosted by Jim Warner, a senior analyst for domestic policy at the White House. It was expected that Dr. Gallo would attend this conference and present some substantiation of his claims. Warner had already become skeptical of Gallo after reviewing Dr. Duesberg's findings, but Gallo never appeared. Instead, the White House conference, which was scheduled for January 19th, 1988. Now, that January 19th is important to me, and 1988 is an important year for me as well, okay? But that is also, isn't that Martin Luther King's, the date they celebrate his birthday on? Okay, something like that, 19th or the 20th. Okay, was abruptly canceled without explanation. So he didn't show up and he didn't say why, okay? Hundreds of millions of dollars continue to be awarded each year to pursue Gallo's questionable claim that the HIV virus causes AIDS. However, no funds are awarded to those who wish to challenge his claim or his claims. Dr. Duesberg has had some interesting experiences since he unwittingly challenged one of the nation's leading bureaucratic scientists at that time. Okay? The President Committee on the HIV virus epidemic invited him to a special meeting in New York, which was covered by the Wall Street Journal scientific writer Katie Leishman. A staff member of this meeting admitted that Duesberg was invited to appear to discredit him. I think I remember something like this. This goal was thwarted when none of the members of the Presidential Commission could answer any of Dr. Duesberg's findings, okay? They consoled themselves by sharply reprimanding him for having challenged Gallo's work. This sounds like Galileo. If they could have executed them, they would, okay? In the history of Galileo, right? When he challenged the notion that the sun, or, like the earth is the center and not the sun, okay? All right. Dr. William Walsh, who is president of Project Hope and perennial, we almost there, y'all. We got about 5 or 6 pages, okay? But Dr. William Walsh, who is president of Project Hope and perennial standard bearer of establishment values, strongly admonished Duesberg. Don't confuse the public. Don't confuse the poor people suffering from this disease. Duesberg was himself confused by this approach, as he had never sought to confuse anyone. He had merely pursued a scientific approach which brought into disrepute the leading government scientists. If this upset a presidential commission whose sole function seemed to be to protect Dr. Gallo, this could hardly be Dr. Duesberg's fault. As we commented, the entire imbroglio typifies what passes for serious scientific work in America. Okay, it's like the Old Boys Network Collective. Miss Leishman characterized the episode as that of instant orthodoxy, which resists review. It also makes me think about all those scientists, I think around that 19 time, wasn't it, that were being oofed, collective, mysteriously. Maybe they were going to come out and speak about something. Maybe they were afraid. They used them in the research, and then at the end they oofed them because they couldn't trust them, they felt, okay? This is for entertainment purposes only, collective. We almost there, my goodness. I don't know why I'm being tortured, but I feel like this has to go out, okay? I feel like people will start to make connections, and people will come up with different ways of healing this, okay? But look, and also in the past, I do recall back when, I think it was the 80s, they said that in Africa they had came out with a drug. I don't know if they still use it. Alpha interferon, I believe it was called. They said it was a cure, but I don't know. All right. Meanwhile, due to the lack of real scientific verification of any single cause, a number of theories about the origin of AIDS have sprung up. These range from the previously mentioned suggestions that it is a new variation of the syphilis spirochaete or something. It's a type of organism, right? To excuse me, to a variation of hepatitis virus, which has been endemic for some years, to its kinship with the Epstein-Barr virus, okay, like Epstein, okay? It's akin, this whole situation, collective, okay? A member of the herpes viridae. This is okay, so Epstein-Barr is a member of the herpes viridae, okay? And let's keep going. I'm going to say something else. This is probably the most widely disseminated human virus today, affecting some 95% of the world's population, okay? It is usually transmitted through saliva. Young people come down with it as infectious mononucleosis. Its consequences include hepatitis and splenomegaly. I don't know if that's like something with I'm thinking the kidneys, like maybe inflammation in the kidneys, something like that. I gotta look it up. With complications of Ray's syndrome, Guillain-Barre syndrome, Bell's palsy, and chronic fever and fatigue. Its effects are often mistaken by physicians for multiple sclerosis, Hodgkin's disease, leukemia, and lupus. And let me see that part again. So they're implicating herpes virus as well as, because they're a part of each other in a sense. Okay, herpes virus and Epstein-Barr virus, okay? So it sounds like, wait a minute. Okay, but they're talking about that in a different aspect, okay? But that Guillain-Barre syndrome, okay, from when I used to study a little bit about health, right? From what I remember, Guillain-Barre, as well as possibly Epstein-Barr, they were implicated as side effects, or, or the result of contaminated vaccines, okay? For some people, this was the reaction they had, okay? That's key. That's very key. I feel like they're making a claim that it could be the vaccinations, okay? It could have been the most recent one to trigger latent retroviruses in the body as well, okay? In addition to a combination of other things. All right. Dr. Stephen Kayser of New York is one of those who identify AIDS as the latest manifestation of syphilis, a logical determination in view of the fact that it occurs frequently among very promiscuous homosexuals and prostitutes. During the first quarter of 1987, recorded cases of syphilis jumped by 23%, the largest increase in a decade. This could be another Tuskegee experiment hidden as a, I don't know, collective. It ain't right, whatever it is, okay? Dr. Peter Duesberg is so positive that there's another agent for AIDS that he has offered to be publicly injected with the AIDS virus. Chuck Ortleb voices another widely held concept that AIDS is but one variation of the widely encountered chronic fatigue syndrome, the Epstein-Barr syndrome, which is now worldwide. And that makes me think about in the Gulf, was it the Gulf War? It might not have been Gulf, but over there when they had the Iraq War, okay? A lot of those soldiers were coming back with chronic fatigue, okay? And it was started going throughout the population of people as well, right? But they talked about initially the 5,800, I think 90 Army people who were infected, okay, collective. But these people are just not to be trusted. They're testing on everybody, okay? Other researchers are certain that AIDS is merely one more consequence of the Great Swine Flu Massacre. When the population was injected with the swine flu vaccine, correlations between AIDS and the real swine flu, that is, a version of this disease which has been observed among swine, okay, like the pig collective, and that's why they like us to eat the pig all day long, okay, have now been established. Other researchers have blamed a more dramatic or accidental variation of the hepatitis serum, which was widely distributed a few years ago. They're talking about vaccines and medicines collective, okay? However, none of these theories can compare in narrative value, okay? So they're being sarcastic here, okay? With the green monkey, quote unquote, theory. According to this theory, which has not been a favorite explanation advanced by the government propaganda, no, I'm sorry, I apologize. According to this theory, which had long been a favorite explanation advanced by the government propaganda group, the Center for Disease Control, for years a tribe of little green monkeys has roamed in Central Africa. Showing little fear of humans, they have often strayed into native villages. These green monkeys carry in their bloodstream a type of the AIDS virus to which they are seemingly immune. However, the little green monkeys have either bitten native women or had intercourse with them, depending on which story you wish to believe. The native women's system then activated the AIDS virus. Okay? They don't purport how it activated, right? But they're saying they activated it, okay? And later infected their husbands, who then went to Haiti collective, okay? And we know they hate Haiti because they took back their power and freed themselves, okay? All right, so, but they went to Haiti, their husbands went to Haiti, where they were paid to perform as male prostitutes by members of the American homosexual population who frequently visited Haiti for amusement. Now, there could be some truth in that part, okay? That's what I'm getting. Because I know they talked about how the elites like to go to the Dominican Republic and I guess Haiti too, right? And when that whole situation happened over there, they were all over there and stealing money and everything. This is for entertainment purposes only, okay? All right. All right, where was I collective? New York infecting now. Haiti, okay? Who went to Haiti where they were paid, okay. And okay, so they said they went to Haiti, had those relations or whatever. Then it says these homosexuals then returned to New York, infecting the New York community. Okay, so the Africans, they could be saying went back to New York, but I'm getting like they're talking about those people whose playground it is. They went back to New York. Okay, but these homosexuals then returned to New York, infecting the New York community and commuting to San Francisco. It sounds like a program collective where they spread the disease on the West Coast. This scenario is claimed to have taken place within a few weeks, from green monkey to homosexuals dying with AIDS in San Francisco. Okay. However, most researchers believe the disease took quite a few years to reach its present epidemic stage. A response to the AIDS epidemic was made difficult by the fact that it was confined to homosexuals, poor blacks, and intravenous drug users who were known by the mosquito. What? Okay, wait a minute. Who were known by the slogan, quote unquote, nothing degenerate is alien to me. There's a lot in here, collective, okay? Even that alien word is sticking out to me, okay? The disease became prevalent at the same time that the homosexual movement was emerging as a powerful political force, allying themselves with blacks, militant homosexuals, for all practical purposes, took over the Democratic Party. Okay, so they're saying how they used blacks to, how they kept using blacks and like code every time they talked about gay or whatever, they put us in there, right? And some people were fighting against it, right? But they used us, okay? But it says militant homosexuals, for all practical purposes, took over the Democratic Party to the dismay of active heterosexuals like Senator Teddy Kennedy. Okay? So he's looking like, what the heck is going on? And the Democrats, we support them so much, and they've done so much horrible things, okay? The traditional leaders of the Democratic Party now begin to fear publicity about AIDS as originating from the Republican Party, which could pose as the party of sexual normality. Okay, so maybe they were accusing the Republic. I don't know, collective. That's ridiculous. But there is little doubt that the conquest of the Democratic Party by the wackos, wresting it away from its long-standing mafia control, okay, was a boon to the Republicans. The result was that the Democrats fought desperately to keep AIDS in the closet, battling any proposals for AIDS testing or other government measures to control its spread. In San Francisco, a plan to close the bathhouses, the nation's most famous homosexual bordellos, had originated with some of the more frightened homosexuals. Okay, I'm getting like these were openly gay people who were in relationships, right? Who had already seen their lovers wither away and die from the disease. Their suggestion was met with a chorus of outrage from the hardcore homos, forgive me, that's what he said, okay, who were loyally supported by San Francisco's political leaders. It had long been established that the homosexual vote now provided the crucial swing vote needed for victory in San Francisco, and they were not able to give up their political power on the national level. Okay, their political power, okay. On the national level, government efforts to deal with AIDS had been limited to pathetic and laughable programs to hand out free condoms. Yes, we all know about that if you're old enough, right? And free drug needles. I remember that, right? To the suicidal fringe among the degenerates. This is what they're saying, okay? In fact, by these tactics, government agencies themselves became official sponsors of homosexual, and that word with the D, collective, okay, and use of narcotics. A strange development for the upholders of the statutes, reflecting the government's new and more enlightened approach. Birds florists in the nation's capital celebrated Valentine's Day. Okay, that's interesting. This Birds florists. I have to look that up, okay? Celebrated Valentine's Day, 1988 again, collective, by offering a Valentine's special consisting of a dozen American Beauty roses and a dozen condoms. I think I remember seeing it. They put it up in the plant like it was, the little plants that you get with, The package, which was called the Safe Sex Bouquet Collective, okay? You know how it is. They'll give us a ribbon and say, okay, wear that and just listen to what we say and go parrot whatever we say, collective, okay? Don't ask no questions. Just take the Safe Sex Bouquet and go on, right? Okay, but it says was received with enthusiasm by the government bureaucracy. Yeah, because they knew they keep us good and silly. And they're like, oh, they're going to love it, okay? Throughout this epidemic, the government has done virtually nothing. While AIDS continues to spread, the Center for Disease Control in Jimmy Carter's backyard had continued to be dominated by old line Democratic politicians. Any cooperation with the fascist regime of Ronald Reagan was refused. From the outset of the AIDS epidemic, the Center for Disease Control has fought a desperate rearguard action to conceal or play down the epidemic. In the summer of 1985, CDC authorities flatly refused to consider headlights or public lights as possible transmitters of the AIDS virus. CDC staff members rejected the idea with horror, lisping that the very notion was impracticable and frightening. Okay. In fact, it was frightening because their plan, the whole thing would be botched because we'd all be terrified collective. Okay. But you know what? It would have forced more research to actually get a cure. Okay. In fact, it is well known that many viruses are carried by insects, especially arboviruses, and they have arthropod-borne viruses. Okay. Some 500 of these arboviruses have now been identified. Some researchers are certain that the bed bug, and that's key, okay, is one of the principal carriers of the AIDS virus, which is spreading so rapidly throughout Africa. The bed bug is found in almost every African hut. Scientists now believe that mosquitoes, the tsetse fly, and it's funny how this is spelled. It's TSETSE. So I see set there, right? But there's also another set, but it's scrambled, okay? So like set, okay? And they made connections before to mosquitoes and flies being inventions of the devil, so to speak, okay? All right, let's go. And I can recall now when I was younger, just growing my 20s and stuff, I would be viciously attacked by mosquitoes, okay? And no one else would, it seemed. Okay, but I don't know. It's something, I feel like their attack, I don't know, collective. They attack the Empress and the Emperor. So, okay, let's go. All right, now you know I done lost my place. Okay, this is important too. Let me read this part again. Some researchers are certain that the bed bug is one of the principal carriers of the AIDS virus, which is spreading so rapidly throughout Africa. The bed bug is found in almost every African hut. Scientists now believe that mosquitoes, the tsetse fly, the lion, and black beetles may also be transmitting AIDS viruses in Africa. This offers a rational explanation for the rapid spread of AIDS in many different African countries. None of these insects can be found in all African countries, but one or more are present in large numbers in every region of Africa. So they're implicating the possibility of, what do you call those? Insects, right? And look, with the beetles, we have the black beetle. Now that, they say how the black beetle, they're saying, could carry this, right? Now, the reason I did that video, that corny little Illuminati lullaby, is because they sent a black beetle to my home, okay? I didn't know that, they allowed me to read this, my ancestors, to let me know why, but I knew it was something about spells, okay? But I killed it. I opened it, okay? All right, but may also be traced, okay, in this office. Okay, we're almost there. We only have like 2 more pages collected. Well, maybe a little more than 2. Oh my goodness. Okay. In 1900, Dr. Walter Reed proved that the Aedes aegypti mosquito was the vector for yellow fever. It is now known that some monkeys do carry an AIDS type of virus, but as Dr. Duesberg discovered, the HIV virus, to which Dr. Gallo of NIH attributes sole responsibility for AIDS infection, is only present in about half of all AIDS cases. Okay, so the AIDS virus is only present in half the cases. Okay, a factor which Dr. Gallo forbears to explain. The question is, what is the infecting agent in the other half of the AIDS cases? Or as Dr. Duesberg states, the HIV virus is not the infecting agent in any of them. Okay. If this is the case, then the massive government testing program for the presence of HIV virus are a multi-million-dollar hue and cry after false trails. I'm thinking he wants trials, okay? Although the Center for Disease Control has continued to insist that poverty, environment, and insects all have absolutely nothing to do with the AIDS transmission, an advertisement appeared May 1987 in Science magazine seeking a research entomologist who would study the possible role of biting arthropods in transmitting human immunodeficiency. I remember when they did the study, okay? Virus applied to the Center for Disease Control. So they wanted someone to come and apply to work on this, okay? The perils of offending preconceived theories about AIDS continue to dog researchers. When the Institute of Topical Medicine presented the results of research it had concluded there and which indicated, let me see that again. When the Institute of Topical Medicine presented the results of research it had concluded there and which indicated there was an arboviral connection to AIDS, okay? Talking about the insects. The University of Michigan, under considerable pressure from the Center for Disease Control, promptly cut off all of their funding. At Oxford, on August 25, 1986, Professor John Claude Sermon of Paris Pasteur Institute reported that AIDS had been found in African insects. The virus had been isolated in mosquitoes, cockroaches, ants, and tsetse flies. This was a direct contradiction to the claims of the CDC that the AIDS virus could not be carried by mosquito or any other insects, okay? All right, collective, we are almost there. California physician Bruce Halstead, MD, states that modern medicine has no cure for AIDS, cancer, or radiation sickness. He also points out that his research establishes that the AIDS virus is capable of 1 trillion mutations. Now, how do they know that? Okay. Meanwhile, AIDS patients who are being treated by oncologists, cancer specialists, are reported to be dying at a much greater rate than AIDS patients who are being treated by holistic methods. Many of them are surprising medical statisticians by surviving longer than the 2-year time span allotted after the diagnosis of the disease, okay? One 40-year-old patient in San Francisco, Dan Turner, is now the longest living victim of AIDS. He says he was infected during a trip to New York in June 1981. And on February 12, 1982, he was informed by his physician that he had quote unquote gay cancer. After developing the unmistakable symptoms of Kaposi's sarcoma, he had observed a regimen of vitamin C, natural foods, meditation, acupuncture, and weightlifting. Okay. Lawrence Badley, MD, in his groundbreaking work, Healing AIDS Naturally. Okay, so that book again is Lawrence Badley. Badley is Badgley. Okay, in his groundbreaking book titled Healing AIDS Naturally. Okay, offers a number of treatments. A typical one having shown good results with a vegetarian diet of vegetables, vitamins, wheatgrass, juice, and herbs, which is accompanied by 8 or 9 cloves of raw garlic each day. Let me say that again. It says offers a number of treatments. A typical one having shown good results was a vegetarian diet of vegetables, vitamins, wheatgrass, juice, herbs, which is accompanied by 8 or 9 cloves of raw garlic each day. Okay. As well, it says, while the government fiddles, the American public continues to burn at the thought of being infected with AIDS, a fatal disease. Referees at boxing matches and other blood sports now wear medical gloves to avoid being infected by splattering blood from the contestants. Court officials don protective clothing such as gloves and surgical masks when forced to appear in court with diseased AIDS victims. Forgive me, collective, okay? Look, they're talking about wearing gloves and masks. What does that remind you of? The 19. There's a correlation here, collective. These are like hidden. It's like reading in between the lines. There's some correlation to that 19, that when that came out, and today in this situation, okay? They could be, those recent ones could be activators for different conditions, collective. All right. While the government, okay, let's see. Okay, it says these accoutrements arouse rage and horror from civilian libertarians who claim these protective techniques create a harmful atmosphere for the AIDS patient, okay? So, oh my goodness. So it's like, since he is probably already, the argument would seem to be mute. Okay, so they're like, oh, just forget it. Just go over there with your dirty, nasty hands and make the patient sicker. Okay, what kind of, I know that is not what they teach in medicine, okay? It might be what some of them do. I've seen some of that, right? But yeah, that's not what they teach, at least. The established fact that from its outset, the AIDS epidemic was confined to the well-identified groups of homosexuals, Haitians, intravenous drug users, and blacks has also created a furor at the American Civil Liberties Union. It's being a precept of egalitarian society that a disease should not be so bigoted in choosing its victims. Okay? Not a natural disease, collective. In New York State prisons, this is another factor, okay? In New York State prisons from 1984 to 1986, the toll of AIDS victims was 45% Hispanic, 43% Black, and 97% of them being intravenous drug users, okay? And this is according to the New York Times of February 7th, 1988, okay? But you have here as well, it's like the perfect storm, collective. And then you have the prison systems, right? Where you don't protect people, okay? You say, oh, they're criminals, so you can just go in there and torture them, collective, okay? So people have no protection against being sexually assaulted, right? That video up on the community board, collective, it's just too much. So we have to start suing these prison systems. Okay, I don't know. They don't have much money as it is, but we have to make it clear that this is not acceptable. No one should be violated like that because they committed a crime, collective, okay? And we shouldn't just sit back and say, oh, we're civilized and we let it go on and do nothing, right? As a nation, right? This writer, having previously established in The Curse of Canaan that homosexuality from the time of Canaan himself to the present day, okay, and this is this person's views, right? Okay, but let's see what they got to say. There's a lot of good information collected. We just have to say, we take what's good for us and we leave the rest, okay? This writer, having previously established in The Curse of Canaan that homosexuality from the time of Canaan himself to the present day has had its origins in pollution of the original root race, okay? So they saying how they corrupted the aboriginals, so to speak, okay? To the point where today, there's certain things that we do, many of us, right? It doesn't have to be just that, okay? That may not be something that we did in the past. All right. My goodness. Okay, so it says the curse of Canaan, that homosexuality from the time of Canaan himself to the present day has had its origins in pollution of the original root race, the confusion of sexual identity being a direct consequence of the resulting confusion of racial identity, confusing the DNA pattern of the genetic structure, okay? I guess he's sort of going back to what they were talking about with the biophotons triggering in the cells, okay? So it also goes back to talking to water and saying kind words and you see beautiful crystals, right? It also goes back to carrying a baby and you're trying to be calm and at peace, right? Because it affects the baby in the cells, okay? So it makes sense at some level. Okay. So this propaganda is altering us. Okay. And not to say you be who you want to be, right? Like I said, I am nobody to tell you who to be because I'm still trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be here doing. Okay. I'm struggling just to put the videos out. Okay. All right. But let's go. We're almost there. Okay. So it said, confusion, the confusion of sexual identity being a direct consequence of the resulting confusion of racial identity, confusing the DNA pattern of the genetic structure, it is hardly surprising to find in Joy Schellenberg's useful book, Complete Guide to Gay Parenting, Doubleday 1985, that gay couples who were white are found to adopt almost exclusively Black children. This is unfair to the Black adoptees who, through no fault of their own, will then be exposed to the possibility of contracting AIDS from one or the other of their gay foster parents. It would seem that gay whites are unwilling to expose other whites to the perils of alternative lifestyle. Okay, collective. I don't know. I hope this is not offensive, okay? I just feel like there is some very important information, in terms of hidden information, okay? And I remember back then when they talked about those adoptions, it was a lot of people were complaining about that, okay? And they made it difficult for Black people to adopt Black children, okay? All right, collective. Hopefully this helps someone. I read this book because I see now where it costs like $500 for this book. Okay. And I saw that chapter, okay, and I thought this would be relevant. Okay, but if you like the video, like the video.